Hey guys, tonight we start with something deceptively simple: sandals. Not just any sandals, though, the kind strapped onto the feet of Roman soldiers, those famous caligae that carried legions across continents. Imagine yourself waking in the cold gray of dawn, the camp still hushed, except for a distant clatter of pots and the occasional cough of a soldier stirring awake. You pull your blanket tighter for a moment, but orders are orders, and your day starts on your feet. Literally. The first task? Reaching for those leather straps, rough to the touch, and looping them around your ankles as you lace the sandals tight. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is right now. I love seeing those little location notes roll in. It's like this sleepy little campfire is flickering across so many time zones at once. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The straps squeak faintly as you tug them tighter. You wiggle your toes against the chill. These aren't plush sneakers or cozy slippers. They're raw leather with iron hobnails hammered into the sole. They're stiff, and they're heavy, and if you've ever thought marching 20 miles with flat sandals sounded like torture, well, you probably won't survive this morning. The Romans, though, they did. And they did it day after day. You shuffle out of your tent, the early earth cold and gritty under the edges of your sandals. Already you feel the hard pressure of hobnails against your heel, like tiny pebbles pressing upward. But that's the design. Those nails give traction, durability, and, if you stomped hard enough, a weaponized crunch. Each step scratches the ground with the sound of metal scraping stone. Multiply that by a few thousand men, and the whole army wakes to a rhythm of iron footsteps. It's no wonder the phrase, "the Roman war machine," stuck. Here's a fact you might not expect. Those iconic caligae weren't some luxury military boot. They were issued gear, meant to be tough and replaceable. The army demanded that each soldier lace up properly every morning, because improperly tied sandals weren't just uncomfortable, they were dangerous. Loose straps could unravel mid-march, throw off formation pacing, or trip you during a charge. And let's be honest, nothing ruins a dramatic battlefield moment quite like face-planting because your sandal flopped off. You glance around camp, watching others tie their sandals. Some men smear oil over cracked leather, while others knot fresh thongs cut from hides. A centurion passes, inspecting quickly, the way a modern sergeant might bark about tucked-in shirts. He doesn't care about style. He cares that you can march 40 miles without whining about blisters. That's discipline strapped around your ankles. There's a quirky tidbit here. Certain Roman soldiers, when especially bored, carved patterns into the hobnails of their soles. So when they marched across dusty roads, their footsteps left cheeky imprints like "Hail Caesar," or even cruder jokes. Imagine graffiti, but on the ground with every step. Archaeologists have literally found soles with embedded iron letters that once spelled out messages. Somewhere in the empire, a soldier was cracking up knowing he was stamping his commander's name, or an insult, into the dirt for miles. As you finish tying your straps, the light grows, and you feel the day's first weight settle in. Not just the sandals, but what they represent. You're part of a machine fueled by thousands of feet moving in unison. There's almost a hypnotic quality to it. Each sandal is a cog in Rome's long-distance dominance. Without them, the empire doesn't march, doesn't expand, doesn't hold together. Yet historians still argue whether every legionary wore the same model. Some evidence suggests seasonal variations. Lighter sandals for summer, closed boots for freezing winters on the Rhine. Others claim the caliga remain the default all year, forcing soldiers to improvise with woolen socks or animal skins stuffed in for warmth. You picture your toes turning purple in a German forest, wrapped in makeshift insulation, still laced into those stubborn straps. By now you've tightened every loop, double-checked every knot. Your feet feel locked, armored, and slightly uncomfortable, which is basically how Roman mornings were meant to begin. You glance at your comrades, all standing, all stamping lightly, testing their footing. The sandals are loud, clattering as though announcing, "We're awake, we're ready." The sound is so distinctive that enemies reportedly recognized Roman troops long before they saw them. A marching thunder of hobnails, an empire's heartbeat echoing across stone roads. Of course, you can't help smirking at the modern irony. Imagine a Roman soldier stepping into a shopping mall today, sandals clicking across tile. Security would hear him halfway across the food court. Not exactly stealth mode, but 2,000 years ago, that metallic chorus wasn't a flaw. It was intimidation on a continental scale. So here you are, sandals strapped, dawn breaking, ready to move. The day's march stretches ahead, dust rising with each step. The first lace of the morning has tied you into history itself, and the next time you glance down at your own footwear, maybe your socks, maybe your sneakers, you'll remember how much civilization once depended on leather straps and iron nails. The camp is stirring louder now, pots banging, officers calling. Your sandals grip as you shift your weight. You'll walk, you'll sweat, and yes, you'll probably blister. But with every scrape of hobnail on stone, you're keeping pace with the empire. You're already a few steps into the march. But before the day wears on, take a closer look at what's actually strapped around your feet. Those sandals, the caliga, aren't just random chunks of leather. They're the result of centuries of tinkering, trial, and soldierly complaints. At first glance, they look like something you'd wear to a backyard barbecue, except studded with nails, and guaranteed to leave you limping if you borrowed the wrong size. But the Romans, being Romans, made even sandals into an instrument of conquest. The anatomy of a caliga starts with its sole. Thick leather, layered and compressed until it feels like a plank, sits under your heel and arches. This isn't the squishy foam padding of your modern sneakers. It's a stiff, unforgiving foundation designed to resist wear. Embedded into that sole are iron hobnails, dozens of them, hammered in from the inside out. They shine dully in the morning light as you walk. Each nail's head juts slightly from the underside, ready to dig into dirt, gravel, or the slick stones of a Roman road. The hobnails serve as both traction and reinforcement, preventing the leather from wearing down too quickly. They also make a terrifying sound en masse, like someone dragging chains across cobblestones. On top of that sole rests the open vamp, the upper portion of the sandal. Long strips of leather are cut and punched with holes, lacing upward to your ankle. The design looks deceptively airy, like something you'd expect to see on a sunny Mediterranean beach. But don't be fooled. Those openings let sweat evaporate, mud slip through, and, crucially, make sure your feet don't rot inside damp, closed boots. It's brutal pragmatism disguised as style. Soldiers had no time for trench foot centuries before the term existed. Your fingers brush the straps as you march, tightening and retightening instinctively. They wind around your ankle in a crisscross, then tie off just above the shin, too loose, and the sandal flaps dangerously. too tight, and you cut off circulation. There's a sweet spot, and every soldier finds it the hard way after a dozen blisters. The genius of the lacing system is adjustability. Thick woolen socks in winter, loosen the straps, barefoot in the blistering summer, cinch them down. The sandal flexes with the seasons, far more versatile than it looks. Here's a quirky fact. Caligae weren't just footwear. They became a nickname. The emperor Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus was called Caligula, literally little boot, because as a child he wore a tiny pair while accompanying his father on campaign. Imagine being saddled with a lifelong nickname because of your shoes. It's like an emperor today being called Sneaker Kid because he wore baby Jordans. Yet the name stuck, and history remembers him less for his sandals than for his eccentricities and cruelties. Still, it's telling that Roman footwear was iconic enough to brand an emperor. The sandals were also surprisingly uniform across the empire. Soldiers from Spain to Syria laced the same basic model, though minor tweaks existed. The army valued standardization. A legion looked orderly, not just in formation, but down to their footwear. You'd never confuse a Roman camp for a ragtag group of mercenaries. Just glance at their feet, each one tied in disciplined straps and studded soles. This uniformity also streamlined supply. Need replacements? The cobbler doesn't ask your shoe style preference. He just grabs the army template and starts hammering. Of course, historians still argue whether every soldier really wore the same design. Some suggest cavalry troopers had sturdier boots, while officers sometimes favored closed-toe models that screamed, "I'm in charge." Others propose subtle variations based on climate zones, like wider straps for hotter provinces. What remains clear is that the caliga wasn't fashion, it was engineering. A shoe with one job, to keep you moving. You pause for a second, letting your mind drift down to the nails in your soles. Each one had to be placed carefully. Too few, and the sole wore thin. Too many, and you felt like you were walking on a bed of thumbtacks. Soldiers sometimes replaced or adjusted hobnails themselves, tapping them back in with camp hammers. Archaeologists have even found soles with decorative patterns made from hobnails, proving that boredom plus iron nails equals surprisingly artistic shoes. A soldier might leave behind not just footsteps, but footprints shaped like stars, crosses, or crude jokes, graffiti written with every step. One can't help but imagine the modern equivalent. Soldiers today requesting their boots with LED soles or personal slogans etched into the tread. Back then, though, individuality stayed underfoot. On the surface, the caliga screamed conformity, but in the dirt, the footprints whispered rebellion. So, as you march, each step clicks with the cold rhythm of iron. The design is simple but relentless. Nothing wasted, nothing fancy, just straps, leather, and nails working together to turn fragile human feet into the empire's most reliable transport system. The sandals don't look like much, but without them, Rome doesn't move. And if Rome doesn't move, it doesn't rule. You glance up at the horizon where the road stretches endlessly. Beneath you, the caliga does its silent job, biting the ground and carrying you forward. The design is plain, the purpose is clear. And the story of an empire begins not with marble temples or golden coins, but with the crunch of a sandal pressing into stone. The march goes on, and you start to notice the real nature of what's under your feet. The caliga isn't some random sandal you bought off a street stall. It's a collection of carefully chosen materials, each one telling its own story about empire, economy, and practicality. You bend slightly, feeling the give of leather under your arch. the hard bite of iron nails at your heel, and the faint creak that comes from straps rubbed raw by sweat and dust. To understand the sandal, you've got to break it down into its ingredients. First, the leather. Roman sandals weren't whipped up from whatever scraps lay around. They needed hides strong enough to endure hundreds of miles. Cowhide was the standard, tough and thick, but goatskin sometimes made its way into straps because it flexed more easily. The tanning process was no picnic. Skins were scraped clean of flesh and hair, soaked in vats filled with lime, then slathered in concoctions of tree bark, urine, or even animal dung, whatever chemicals could tan and toughen the hide. It smelled atrocious, but the result was leather that could endure a season of marching. You imagine some poor tanner working all day in that stink, wiping his brow and muttering, "All this so some soldier won't get a blister." Then there's the iron. Those hobnails you've been clattering across the stone roads weren't made by magic. Blacksmiths churned them out in enormous quantities, hammering soft iron into nail shapes, flattening their heads wide so they wouldn't punch straight through the soles. Each sandal might use 60 to 100 nails, and with thousands of soldiers in a legion, that's millions of nails per campaign. A single Roman campaign must have sounded like a nightmare for local blacksmiths. You want how many nails? The nails weren't just about durability, though. In a pinch, a sandal sole could double as a weapon. Stomp down hard, and you've got a nasty iron-studded imprint, history's accidental steel-toed boots. But the true marvel is the sole itself. Think of it like a layered cake of leather. Multiple sheets, stacked, glued, and stitched together, then punctured with hobnails. Those sheets made the sole thick enough to absorb the pounding of 20 miles a day. Archaeologists studying worn-out soles note the pattern of compression. Heels and balls of feet wore faster, just like your sneakers today. That detail alone makes the past feel uncomfortably close. You can almost see a tired legionary flopping down by a campfire, groaning as he yanks off a sandal and mutters about his aching arches. Quirky tidbit. Not all sandals were created equal. Officers sometimes paid for fancier leathers, dyed in deeper shades, or polished for a cleaner look. Meanwhile, ordinary soldiers had the standard issue rough brown straps. There's even evidence some sandals were patched with mismatched leather, turning them into Frankenstein footwear. Practicality ruled. If it worked, it stayed. One scholar half joked that the Roman army must have looked like a marching thrift store from the ankles down. And here's the part historians still argue about: just how uniform the materials really were. Did every legion demand the same leather thickness, the same iron nails, or did local suppliers improvise with what they had? Some finds suggest soles in colder provinces used thicker hides, while desert outposts favored lighter cuts. Others argue standardization was stricter, Rome was Rome, and variation was weakness. The debate rages quietly in academic papers, but out here on the dusty road, your feet don't care about scholarly arguments. They just care whether the leather holds together until the next camp. The smell is something you can't ignore either. Fresh leather carries its own musky tang, but once it's soaked in sweat, mud, and the occasional unlucky puddle of horse droppings, the odor becomes legendary. Roman camps weren't fragrant spas. They were giant shoe racks on the move, each pair slowly cooking under the sun. You imagine 5,000 sandals baking at once, releasing a bouquet that could knock a fly unconscious. And yet, despite the grime and stink, there's beauty in the craftsmanship. Soldiers sometimes decorated their straps with tiny cuts or burns, personalizing them in ways that wouldn't ruin function. Others kept them oiled and supple with animal fat, treating them with surprising care. Your average legionary might have been rough and tough, but when it came to sandals, he knew neglect meant misery. The soundscape tells its own story. Step on gravel, and the nails crunch sharply. Step on stone, and the sandals clack like miniature hammers. Step on packed dirt, and they whisper with a rasping sigh. Multiply that by thousands, and the march becomes a living drumbeat. Some historians suggest this metallic thunder was psychological warfare. Enemies hearing the nails long before the legions appeared, like a storm rolling closer. Others say it was just practical noise, no different than traffic on a modern highway. Still, as you walk, the thought lingers. Your sandals are not silent companions. They announce your presence with every step. And then there's the weight. You can't ignore it. Each hobnailed sole is heavier than it looks, and after hours of marching, your calves burn, your thighs ache. The sandals seem to mock you, whispering, "This is just day one, soldier." Modern runners brag about lightweight trainers. You, meanwhile, are dragging slabs of cowhide and iron that could double as construction tools. So the next time you look down, you'll know it's not just footwear. It's history's most basic piece of military tech. Leather, nails, and soles. Three simple ingredients that, together, helped stitch an empire across 3 continents. Without them, Rome might have stumbled before it ever started running. You keep marching, but for a moment, let's step off the road and duck into the workshop where these sandals were born. Behind every clatter of hobnailed feet, there's the quieter rhythm of hammers, awls, and knives in the hands of Roman cobblers. If the soldier's day starts with leather straps, the cobbler's day starts with raw hide and iron, transforming piles of stinking skins into the gear that quite literally carried an empire. Picture a dimly lit shed or stall, its walls smelling strongly of tannins and smoke. Wooden benches are scattered with tools, curved knives, bone awls, spindles of thread, and buckets of water to soften the leather. In the corner, strips of hide are soaking in lime solution, waiting to be scraped clean. A boy apprentice rubs at one piece with a pumice stone, muttering under his breath, while his master is bent over a half-finished sandal. The air is warm, sticky, and tinged with the faint metallic tang of nails cooling in a forge next door. The process begins with pattern cutting. Every caliga started as a set of shapes traced onto thick leather, soles, straps, tongues. Patterns were standardized enough that any trained cobbler across the empire could replicate them. One sharp slice, 2, 3, and the sandal skeleton is laid out on the bench. The upper strips are punched with neat rows of holes, ready for the threading of laces. Then the real work begins, stacking the soles. Multiple sheets of leather are layered, glued with natural resins or animal glue, and then stitched tightly with thick linen cord. The edges are trimmed smooth, like a layered sandwich squared off at the corners. Now comes the noisy part, hobnailing. A cobbler places the stacked sole on an iron anvil, drives nail after nail through it, and hammers them flat. The nails punch through leather like hailstones through a roof, leaving the underside bristling with shiny points until they're bent and smoothed. The pattern is more than random, sometimes geometric, sometimes even decorative. Imagine thousands of these being made each season, and you begin to grasp the industrial scale. Rome wasn't just an army. It was a supply chain stretching across continents, funneled into these tiny workshops. A quirky tidbit here. Some evidence suggests legionaries themselves might have helped cobble their own footwear, especially in long campaigns far from established towns. Portable cobbling kits have been found in camps, simple hammers, small anvils, awls, indicating soldiers patched or replaced sandals on the march. You can almost picture a battle-hardened veteran squatting by the fire, repairing his caliga with the same intensity he sharpened his sword. Weapon in one hand, sandal sole in the other. Not glamorous, but very Roman. But there's also something oddly modern about this assembly line thinking. Soldiers weren't expected to custom order. They received sizes and templates. Too big? Stuff straw inside. Too small? Tough luck, break them in. The Roman military system was ruthless in its practicality. If your sandals broke, you didn't toss them away. You patched them, hammered in new nails, and kept moving. The idea of disposable fashion simply didn't exist. Historians still argue whether these sandals were entirely mass-produced or largely cobbled on demand. Some suggest there were massive centralized workshops, almost like proto-factories, that cranked out thousands of pairs for distribution to legions. Others believe most sandals were made locally, with military contracts handed out to civilian craftsmen near garrisons. The evidence is patchy, but both scenarios reveal the same truth. The Roman army treated footwear as strategically vital. Forget golden eagles or glistening swords. Sandals were the quiet backbone of conquest. The sounds of the workshop echo as you walk. The clink of a hammer, the creak of a leather strap stretched taut, the rasp of a file smoothing a nail head. A soldier might not think much of it when slipping on his sandals, but the labor behind them was immense. For every day you marched 20 miles, some cobbler somewhere spent hours hunched in a smoky shed, stabbing and sewing until his fingers cramped. And yet, imagine the pride. To know your handiwork wasn't just covering someone's feet, but carrying them across Gaul, Britain, Egypt, Mesopotamia. A sandal made in a provincial town could stomp through snow in Germany or sand in Syria months later. These humble workshops fed into history's grand narrative in the simplest, most tactile way, step by step, soul by soul. There's a joke to be made here. Somewhere in a dusty Roman shed, a cobbler probably complained, "I could have been making wine jugs, but no, I'm stuck making shoes for sweaty men." Yet, without him, Caesar's conquests might have limped to a halt. Sometimes world history doesn't hinge on great speeches or decisive battles. It hinges on whether the army had enough hobnails. As the workshop fades from your imagination, the reality of the march returns. You hear again the chorus of sandals striking stone, each one a finished product of countless hours of labor. The thought is sobering. Every clack, every crunch underfoot carries the ghosts of tanners, cobblers, and blacksmiths who quietly powered the empire. And so, as your straps bite into your ankles once more, you realize you're not just wearing sandals. You're walking inside an entire supply chain. You feel the road under your feet now. Each step a steady rhythm of leather and iron, and it's time to appreciate the caligae for what they were built to do. Marching. Not wandering lazily, not strolling through markets. Real forced marches across hills, rivers, and deserts. Imagine yourself tramping 20 miles before breakfast, hobnails biting the ground, straps biting your ankles, and the sun doing its best to make the leather stick to your skin. This is mobility engineered into a sandal. The Romans didn't just move from point A to point B, they moved in formation, fast, coordinated, and often over impossible terrain. The caligae were part of that system. Their thick soles absorbed shock from uneven roads. Their hobnails gave grip when climbing muddy hills, and their open design let sweat and grime escape. You notice the difference immediately if you've ever tried walking in modern flip-flops over rocks. Every step is an adventure, a gamble, a tiny negotiation between comfort and disaster. Even rivers weren't safe escapes from the grind. Marching through a shallow stream, water rushes against your ankles, soaking your socks or bare feet. The leather squishes, but the hobnails grip stone beneath the current. It's terrifying, but functional. You could probably hear the distant laughter of enemies. Look, clanking sandals, if you weren't so focused on not slipping. A quirky fact: some soldiers actually hammered extra traction into their soles with crude grooves or extra nails for wet marches. Basically, the first custom cleats. And then there's the blisters. Your heels start to complain, and your toes rub against rough straps. You catch yourself imagining ancient foot-soaking rituals. Soldiers resting in camp, scraping away calluses, soaking their feet in vinegar or warm water. Some even stuffed grass or moss into sandals to cushion themselves. You shudder to think of trench foot, centuries before the term existed. But it worked, mostly. Soldiers learned to love, or at least tolerate, the pain. Historians still argue whether caligae were designed with comfort in mind at all. Some say their purpose was purely practical, durable, replaceable, standardized. Others argue the design balanced durability with some attention to foot health, especially given the Army's understanding of forced marches. You can see both sides, especially when your toes start screaming after a long march. The open design also gave soldiers a unique ability to read terrain. Mud, sand, snow. Your feet felt it first. Troops could adjust pace, find solid footing, and sometimes even detect hidden dangers like traps or soft ground. It's hard to overstate how much sensory feedback those sandals gave. They were tools as much as clothing. And yet, the march wasn't purely about mechanics. It was a social and psychological event. Thousands of soldiers clumping along in unison, the sound of hobnails echoing across stone roads, dust swirling in their wake. It intimidated locals and enemies alike. There's even evidence that Romans used the clatter of marching boots strategically, sometimes advancing loudly to give the illusion of larger forces. You chuckle to yourself. Modern armies might use tanks. The Romans had sandals and percussion. By the end of a day's march, you feel exhausted, but strangely triumphant. Your calves burn, your feet throb, yet each step is a reminder of the empire's power. A single legionary shoe could carry a man through continents, from desert sands to river fords. Even a casual observer might underestimate the sheer engineering brilliance of these simple sandals. So as you trudge on, think about this. Without the caligae, the Roman army would move slower, tire faster, and maybe even falter. Those rough straps, stiff soles, and iron nails weren't just footwear. They were instruments of conquest. And every painful, sweaty mile you cover in imagination gives you a taste of the grit that helped Rome dominate the ancient world. Your feet ache, heels chafed, toes screaming under rough leather, and suddenly you realize the march is only half the battle. Foot care is an entire science in itself. The Romans knew that a soldier with destroyed feet couldn't hold formation, couldn't charge, couldn't survive. So beyond straps, nails, and leather, they had rituals, tricks, and remedies to keep the caligae usable and the soldier walking. You picture a campfire in the late afternoon. Smoke curls up, smelling faintly of ash and cooked meat. Soldiers sit on low benches or the ground, their sandals off, soles exposed. Someone pours a small basin of warm water, maybe infused with vinegar or herbs, and dips a battered foot in. Others scrape away hardened skin with small knives, carefully avoiding cutting into tender flesh. A quirky tidbit here. Some soldiers reportedly stuffed their sandals with dried moss or soft cloth as temporary cushioning, essentially inventing the first insoles. Not exactly luxurious, but it saved them from limping on the march. Imagine rubbing olive oil or animal fat into the soles and straps, softening the leather, preventing cracking, and perhaps even giving it a faint scent of garlic or smoke. You might wrinkle your nose at the idea, but it worked. A well-oiled caliga could last weeks longer under constant use, and yes, it probably smelled like a stable, but hygiene was relative in the ancient world. The Romans were meticulous about blister prevention. Bandages, poultices, even early salves were applied to areas most prone to friction. Soldiers knew the moment a strap rubbed wrong or a nail dug too deep, swift intervention prevented weeks of incapacitating pain. In some garrisons, medics or senior soldiers maintained stockpiles of ointments, dried herbs, and extra laces, essentially a foot care first aid kit on a continental scale. Yet, historians still argue whether these measures were widespread or only available to elite troops. Some evidence suggests that poorer legions made do with bare minimum care, relying on toughness rather than treatment. Archaeological finds of extremely worn and patched soles hint that some soldiers simply endured pain until the next replacement. You can almost hear a weary legionary muttering, "Better a blister than falling behind." There are also stories, probably exaggerated, of soldiers walking hundreds of miles barefoot after sandals were ruined. They improvised by wrapping feet in cloth or leather scraps, learning painfully what worked and what didn't. These anecdotes reveal not just endurance, but creativity. Necessity, after all, is the mother of invention, even if it's wrapped around raw, calloused feet. And let's not forget the psychological aspect. Caring for your feet wasn't just practical, it was ritualistic. Sitting with comrades, tending your own blisters and straps, listening to stories and complaints, it reinforced bonds. Soldiers learned to watch each other's gait, notice limping, and offer advice or assistance. Foot care was community care, silently woven into the camp's daily rhythm. By the time you lace your sandals back on and resume the march, your feet feel both pampered and prepared, a strange mix of relief and anticipation. You realize that what seems like a simple accessory, the caliga, is in fact a small universe of engineering, maintenance, and social ritual. It's a mix of science, luck, and stubbornness, and you respect it more with every aching step. The march continues. Dust rises around your ankles, and the rhythmic click of hobnails fills the air again. Your freshly tended feet sink slightly into the soles, and for a moment, you feel invincible, or at least marginally less doomed. There's humor in the thought. Centuries from now, we'll talk about leather straps and iron nails, while modern sneakers get Instagram posts. Yet here, now, the caliga reigns supreme. And the lesson is clear. A soldier's effectiveness isn't just weapons, strategy, or courage. It's toes that don't blister, soles that don't split, and sandals that endure. Without proper care, all the empire's plans, formations, and campaigns could collapse underfoot. Every minor scrape, every smear of oil or herbal paste becomes part of the silent machinery of conquest. You trudge onward, feeling every inch of the terrain through the caliga's rigid soles, and it becomes clear that the sandals were as tactical as they were practical. The Roman army relied on their footwear not just to carry them forward, but to grip, hold formation, and adapt to a wide variety of environments. Every stride is part of a system engineered for dominance, and every scrape of hobnail against stone or dirt is a lesson in battlefield mechanics. Crossing rivers is the first challenge of the day. Water gushes around your ankles, cold and biting, soaking through cloth wraps or thin socks. You test your footing carefully, letting the hobnails bite into slippery stones. They give traction where bare leather would slip, almost as if the soles have memory of the rocks beneath. The open design lets water escape quickly, preventing the deadly pooling that could turn toes numb. You might think it's overkill, but misstep and the formation falters. A small detail, but on campaign, small details save lives. Climbing hills or scrambling over mud is next. The thick, layered leather of the sole flexes, just enough to accommodate rough terrain, while hobnails prevent slipping. A quirky tidbit: some soldiers reportedly sharpened their nails slightly to gain extra grip when climbing slick slopes. It sounds extreme, but in certain campaigns, extra traction meant the difference between standing your ground or sliding helplessly into a ravine. You can picture a cohort scaling a muddy hillside, nails sinking into earth, the sandal almost acting like crampons centuries before mountaineering existed. Formation drills also benefit from the caliga. On a flat stretch of road or open field, the sound of synchronized hobnails striking stone or packed dirt signals order and discipline. The rhythm keeps legions marching in step, preventing gaps and confusion. Enemy scouts could even estimate troop numbers by the intensity of the metallic clatter. Imagine being a spy in a nearby forest, hearing thousands of clanking soles approaching like an iron wave. You'd think twice about getting in the way. Historians still argue whether this was a deliberate psychological tactic or merely a byproduct of necessity. Some suggest Roman commanders exploited the sound deliberately to intimidate opponents. Others claim it was simply the unavoidable result of iron-studded sandals on hard roads. Either way, the effect was undeniable. The caliga projected strength with every step. On flat terrain, the caliga provides stability and endurance. On rough terrain, it gives adaptability. On wet or slick surfaces, it offers traction. It's not perfect. Mud can clog the soles, stones can wedge under straps, but the system works remarkably well given the materials available. You feel this with every stride, sensing how each design choice, from nail placement to strap pattern, was refined by centuries of trial, error, and soldierly grumbling. And terrain aside, there's another tactical advantage: noise. If you're advancing on a battlefield, the clack of hobnails can mask other movements, like distant cavalry approaching. Sometimes the sound served as warning, other times it was misdirection. You can almost hear a Roman commander chuckle, imagining the enemy misjudging his numbers based purely on the sound of sandals on stone. Finally, consider how adaptable the caliga was across regions. Marching through Britain's soggy fields, the soles held mud at bay. Crossing Mediterranean deserts, the open design let sand escape. Every stride is a conversation between shoe and environment, a feedback loop informing pace, formation, and tactics. And you, walking in imagination, feel that adaptability firsthand. Each step a negotiation with the ground, the weather, and the weight of your own body. By the time the day begins to wane, you appreciate that the caliga isn't just footwear, it's a strategic tool. It shapes movement, enables endurance, enforces discipline, and even intimidates foes. Every step carries history, engineering, and battlefield psychology, all wrapped around your stubborn, aching toes. And as you trudge onward, the clatter of hobnails becomes a rhythm of conquest, echoing across hills, rivers, and roads that no one else could traverse so efficiently. You've marched for hours, your feet tired but resilient, and now you begin to notice something subtle. The caliga are more than functional. They're symbols, Every scratch, every stamped hobnail, every worn strap speaks of identity, rank, and belonging. A legionary's footwear was a statement, and if you pay attention, you can read it like a silent language. Look closely at the soles. Some soldiers had patterns pressed into the leather, simple geometric shapes, initials, even tiny images. These weren't for decoration alone. They signaled unit affiliation or rank. You can imagine a centurion stepping into camp, scanning the rows of feet, identifying cohorts by the subtle artistry of their soles. The practical becomes social, turning shoes into badges of honor. A quirky tidbit: certain soldiers would carve tiny symbols of luck or superstition into their sandals: horseshoes, crosses, stars, tiny talismans carried wherever they walked. Straps also carried meaning. Leather laces could be tied in specific ways to indicate a veteran versus a new recruit. Some officers even wore additional layers or finer leather to differentiate themselves subtly from the enlisted men. Footwear became a hierarchy you could read at a glance if you knew what to look for. You can almost hear a young recruit nervously tugging his straps into the right pattern, hoping his centurion approves. Historians still argue how much identity these symbols really conveyed. Some suggest most soldiers were too concerned with practicality to care about aesthetics. Others insist that in a rigidly structured army, small signals like strap arrangement or stamped soles were crucial for maintaining cohesion. Whatever the case, you can't deny that some individuality sneaked into even the most standardized sandals. You notice the sound again. Thousands of clattering soles, each subtly different depending on wear, nail placement, and construction. The auditory variation is like a secret code. An officer could hear the difference between seasoned veterans and fresh recruits. A light step, a confident rhythm, a deliberate pause, all readable if you knew how. Your sandals, then, are not just for walking. They're a communicator in iron and leather. The leather itself tells stories. Scuffs and scratches mark previous campaigns. Patched straps indicate improvisation after long marches. Well-oiled surfaces reveal meticulous care. You could track a soldier's history just by inspecting his feet. Imagine standing in a camp of thousands, reading lives from worn soles. There's poetry in that, even if the feet themselves are tired and blistered. And here's a historical reality check. The caliga also functioned as a uniform equalizer. While wealthier citizens could afford finer shoes, a soldier's sandals were standardized, ensuring a level of parity within the ranks. Status still emerged in subtle ways, but everyone marched on roughly the same iron-studded platform, keeping the army cohesive and disciplined. By the time evening falls, you're acutely aware of the dual purpose of these simple sandals. They carry you physically and socially, sustaining movement while signaling belonging. Every step reinforces the rhythm of an empire. Every scratch and stamp a testament to human ingenuity. You realize the caliga are more than shoes. They are a statement, a badge, a declaration that you are part of something larger, walking in unison toward the same horizon. Your legs ache, your feet are sore, yet the march continues. And now it's time to consider the economy behind those caligae. Each pair isn't just a tool or a badge. It's a product of logistics, labor, and careful resource planning on a scale that would make modern supply officers weep with envy. You step through the camp gates, past workshops where replacement sandals are already lined up, ready to swap in when the old ones fail. Every hobnail, every strip of leather represents an investment of time, skill, and money, distributed across the empire to keep the army moving. Follow the supply chain for a moment. Hides are sourced locally where possible, or shipped from distant provinces. Blacksmiths forge nails in regional forges. Cobblers assemble the components in camp workshops or nearby towns. A soldier might march 20 miles in sandals made hundreds of miles away, with materials that traveled through multiple hands before ending under his foot. There's a certain elegance to this. The empire functions like a living organism, every sandal a lifeline carrying weight and history. Quirky tidbit. Some evidence suggests soldiers occasionally received bonus sandals when campaigns stretched long or replacements lagged. These were often slightly better quality or had extra iron nails, a small reward that could keep morale from crumbling after endless marches. Imagine the collective sigh of relief as a new pair replaced soles worn thin from miles of hard roads. Pay matters too. Soldiers weren't buying their sandals, they were issued, but the cost was embedded in their pay and the empire's budget. The state had to plan for replacements, factoring in wear rates, campaign length, and supply line reliability. Historians still argue whether the army deliberately overproduced sandals as a safety margin, or whether shortages were a chronic problem. Archaeological finds of mass-produced soles suggest at least some foresight. Rome didn't leave feet or legions to chance. Workshops in camp were small but crucial economic hubs. Local laborers, sometimes civilian contractors, were paid in coin or rations, churning out replacements at a pace matching the army's needs. In remote provinces, soldiers might even cobble together makeshift repair stations, salvaging leather from old shoes or local animals. You picture a legionary tying together patchwork soles by firelight, hammering in mismatched nails, muttering about the inconvenience of empire, yet somehow making it work. The sandals themselves tell a story of cost efficiency. Leather was thick and durable, but repairable. Nails were abundant, but simple to replace. Every decision balanced longevity with economy. The Roman military wasn't about luxury, it was about sustainability. One pair of sandals might march hundreds of miles, be patched, and march hundreds more before being retired. That's resource management in action. And the strategic importance? Consider this. A legion delayed because of failing footwear could mean the difference between victory and disaster. Roads in Gaul or the deserts of Syria were unforgiving. A missing sole or split strap could halt a supply convoy or delay a tactical maneuver. Rome's economy, therefore, extended even to the smallest component under a soldier's foot. By the time you glance down at your own worn caliga, you start to appreciate the interconnectedness of empire. They are more than shoes. They are currency, logistics, and morale, all rolled into one leather and iron package. Each step you take in imagination now carries the weight of administration, production, and planning, reminding you that conquest is as much about organization as it is about bravery. The sun climbs higher, sweat trickles down your back, and suddenly you notice the small miracles of adaptation built into the caliga. They're not just a single-purpose shoe. They're a flexible, responsive tool designed to meet the unexpected challenges of a vast and varied empire. You navigate rocky hillsides, soft sand, and muddy riverbanks, each surface engaging differently with the hobnailed soles. You realize that the Roman soldier's relationship with his sandals is tactile intelligence. The shoe becomes an extension of the foot, reading terrain and adapting with every step. Consider the open design again. It allows for ventilation in sweltering heat, letting sweat evaporate while preventing trench foot. Yet it also permits mud and small debris to escape, rather than clog the sole. On sandy roads, grains slip out with every stride. leaving your foot lighter and less prone to abrasion. On rocky terrain, the layered leather and iron nails give both cushioning and grip, as though the sandals are alive, adjusting underfoot. There's a strange elegance in this simplicity. The caliga is neither over-engineered nor under-equipped. It's perfectly balanced for its purpose. Quirky tidbit: some soldiers reportedly experimented with adding extra leather straps or even metal plates to adapt to unusual terrain. Archaeologists have found patched sandals with iron strips reinforcing the sole, likely improvised by a soldier crossing particularly treacherous territory. It's like field innovation on the go, centuries before boot modifications became an outdoor hobby. You can picture a legionary squatting by a riverbank, hammer in hand, modifying his sandal as if preparing for a minor adventure every day. Historians still argue whether such adaptations were officially sanctioned or purely individual ingenuity. Did the army encourage creativity in sandal modification, or were these rogue improvisations tolerated out of necessity? Either way, the evidence suggests the caliga was both standardized and personal, uniform enough to maintain order, flexible enough to survive unexpected trials. There's also the matter of durability. A properly maintained caliga could last hundreds of miles, and soldiers learned to gauge wear intuitively. Leather that creased in the wrong place, nails loosening, or straps fraying signaled impending replacement. You notice every scuff and scratch as a warning sign, and a soldier's ability to anticipate failure could mean the difference between smooth marching or a painful, blistered halt. The caliga's adaptability extends beyond terrain. In cold or wet weather, soldiers sometimes stuffed socks or cloth into their sandals. In desert heat, bare skin absorbed the sun, while leather shielded soles from burning sand. It's a study in functional versatility, marrying simple materials with practical foresight. Every detail has been refined over centuries, proving the Roman army's understanding of the interaction between human physiology, environment, and movement. And then there's the psychological edge. A soldier wearing sandals that grip, bend, and protect instinctively feels more confident. Confidence translates into steadiness in formation, endurance during forced marches, and focus in battle. The caliga doesn't just protect the foot, it protects morale. Walking in a well-constructed pair, you feel rhythm, balance, and momentum, even imagining yourself clacking across the Via Appia alongside thousands of comrades. By the time you pause for a brief rest, dust swirling around your ankles, you start to appreciate the genius of these simple sandals. They are functional, flexible, adaptive, and psychologically empowering. Every step you take is a negotiation with the environment, a dance choreographed over centuries of trial, error, and survival. And every scuff, dent, or hammered hobnail tells a story of a soldier meeting the challenges of the ancient world. Step by step, the march continues, and fatigue sets in. But now you begin to notice another subtle advantage of the caligae: sound. The metallic click of hobnails against stone, dirt, or wooden bridges isn't just incidental noise. It's part of the Army's communication system. You hear it beneath your feet, a rhythm echoing across the landscape, a kind of marching Morse code that could intimidate allies and enemies alike. The collective clatter of thousands of soldiers becomes a signal, a cadence that reinforces order and instills psychological pressure. Imagine a Roman cohort crossing a bridge. Each step is synchronized, hobnails striking wood with precise timing. The sound carries for hundreds of meters, letting other units know exactly where they are and maintaining cohesion. You can almost feel the vibration in the soles of your feet, a tactile feedback loop that aligns body and mind with the marching rhythm. Quirky tidbit. Some soldiers reportedly timed their steps to produce near-musical patterns on certain stone roads, accidentally creating something like marching percussion centuries before drum lines existed. But the sound wasn't just for show. Commanders could gauge the formation's strength and morale by listening. A staggered, uneven clatter might indicate fatigue or confusion. A sharp, regular rhythm signals readiness and discipline. Historians still argue whether the Romans deliberately used the auditory impact as psychological warfare or if it was merely a happy side effect. Either way, your ears and your imagination feel the power. The caliga's construction amplifies this effect. Thick leather soles transmit force efficiently, while hobnails create sharp, penetrating tones. Even on softer dirt, the sound carries. You notice how the auditory signature changes with terrain. A click-clack on stone, a muted thump on sand, a hollow ping over wooden planks. Each change communicates subtly with the soldier's environment, giving them unconscious cues about footing, pace, and rhythm. And then there's the camaraderie factor. Marching in unison, every clack echoing from one soldier to the next, reinforces unity. The sound is as much a social signal as a tactical one. You imagine new recruits trying desperately to keep in step, hearing the seasoned veteran's steady rhythm, learning through repetition, absorbed into the collective pulse of the legion. The psychological aspect doesn't stop there. The clatter alone could intimidate local populations or approaching enemies. A distant observer might hear the metallic thunder and assume a far larger force than actually exists. In some campaigns, the Roman army reportedly timed marches to maximize this auditory intimidation, turning sandals into instruments of fear. Then you notice the subtle feedback to your body. Each impact tells you about the terrain. Soft ground, slick stone, uneven patches. Your foot reacts instinctively, adjusting balance and stride. It's as if the sandals and hobnails have become extensions of your nervous system, conveying tactile information that no simple shoe could replicate. By mid-afternoon, you realize the caliga's influence reaches beyond the purely physical. It shapes sound, perception, and coordination simultaneously, enhancing both morale and tactical effectiveness. Step by step, your imagination walks through centuries of carefully engineered rhythm, discipline, and sensory feedback, all beneath your aching, blistered feet. Your feet are sore, your calves tight, and yet there's a strange comfort in the rhythm of your steps. It's in this steady cadence that the caliga reveals another secret: endurance. These sandals were designed for long-term use, to carry a legionary over hundreds of miles without failure. Every layer of leather, every hobnail, every stitched strap works in concert to turn human legs into machines of endurance, letting Rome stretch its reach across continents. You imagine a soldier leaving the gates of Rome, heading north toward the Rhine. Cobblestones rattle underfoot, dust swirls around ankles, and the rhythmic click of hobnails keeps time with his heartbeat. The leather has molded to his foot over weeks, forming a personal fit that would have been impossible with rigid boots. Even the roughest terrain, gravel, mud, river fords, becomes negotiable. The caliga flexes, absorbs shock, and keeps him moving mile after mile. Quirky tidbit: some soldiers reportedly slept in their sandals when the weather was mild, keeping them at hand and preventing them from stiffening overnight. It sounds uncomfortable, but it's a clever way to maintain readiness. If your life literally depends on every step, you treat footwear as sacred. Historians still argue whether caligae were truly optimal for long marches, or simply the best compromise given available materials. Some suggest more enclosed boots might have offered better protection, while others argue that the open design prevented worse injuries from sweat and heat. Either way, soldiers developed a kind of instinctive wisdom about how to maximize the shoe's effectiveness. You notice it in the way they adjust straps, stuff cloth in places for comfort, or oil the leather to extend durability. And it's not just the soldier benefiting. The empire itself relies on endurance. A legion that marches farther, faster, and more reliably exerts influence, projects power, and maintains supply lines. The caliga is part of that invisible infrastructure, transforming raw human stamina into a coordinated, unstoppable force. Without it, the image of marching legions dissolves into exhaustion, missed formations, and faltering campaigns. You can feel the subtle ingenuity in details. The layered sole cushions the foot while maintaining durability. The iron nails prevent premature wear and give traction. The straps balance flexibility with security. The open design vents heat and prevents infections. All these factors combine to create endurance, not just for one soldier, but for the legion as a whole. And consider the psychology. Walking in a shoe you know can carry you hundreds of miles is empowering. Confidence breeds steadiness, which in turn enhances performance and cohesion. Imagine the mental relief of stepping into a familiar caliga each morning, knowing that despite the dust, mud, or snow, your feet will survive the day's march. By evening, your legs ache. But there's a rhythm, a flow, a sense of harmony between foot, sandal, and road. Endurance is not merely physical, it's technical, tactical, and psychological. And in this small, often overlooked piece of equipment, the Roman army found a way to extend the human body, allowing it to march farther than any modern imagination might first believe. You trudge along, dust clinging to your calves, sun fading behind distant hills, and it becomes clear that the caliga's story isn't just about function, it's also about identity. These sandals, worn, battered, patched, and personalized, tell you who belongs to Rome and who doesn't. Every scuff and stitch communicates experience, loyalty, and even social hierarchy within the legion. Look at the variations among soldiers. Officers sometimes had finer leather or additional polish. Veterans' sandals bore the patina of countless marches. Recruits' shoes were stiff and unfamiliar, digging into skin until molded. A quirky tidbit. Some soldiers carved small symbols into their soles. Horseshoes, animals, even initials, like secret signatures. Imagine walking hundreds of miles and leaving a personal mark stamped into the ground with every step. It's subtle, but meaningful. The straps, too, speak volumes. Tight, secure lacing indicates discipline and care. Loose, haphazard tying might hint at fatigue or inexperience. You can almost hear a centurion judging his cohort, noticing the rhythm of their steps, the sound of leather flexing, and the subtle visual cues that mark veteran from novice. Historians still argue how much emphasis was placed on these symbolic elements, but there's no doubt that individuality found a way to emerge within standardization. The caliga also reinforced cohesion. Everyone marched in similar footwear, standardized to a degree, which created a visual and auditory uniformity. At a distance, a legion could be recognized not by banners alone, but by the collective clack of thousands of hobnailed soles. This is discipline you feel in the chest, a rhythm that organizes men, commands obedience, and signals identity without a single word. Consider also the material culture. Soldiers often repaired or modified their sandals. adding patches of leather, hammering in extra nails, or creating makeshift cushioning. These small acts of ingenuity turned a uniform product into a personal tool, reflecting the soldier's experience and adaptability. You can almost see him at camp, hunkered by the fire, repairing soles with a handful of nails and some scraps of hide. And there's the social aspect. Footwear became a silent language within the ranks, veterans advising recruits on tying straps, swapping repair techniques, showing off clever patches. These interactions reinforced bonds, building trust and teamwork essential for cohesion in long campaigns. You sense that every stride carries this unspoken conversation forward. The symbolism extends to conquest itself. Marching in caliga signifies participation in an enterprise larger than oneself, an empire moving across continents. Every mark on the leather, every polished or patched strap, represents accumulated experience, sacrifice, and belonging. The sandals are tools, yes, but they are also talismans, carrying stories, history, and the identity of the wearer. By the time you pause again, you realize that what seems like simple footwear is a complex cultural artifact. Each worn sole is a map of experience, each strap a coded message. You're not just walking in sandals, you're stepping into identity, discipline, and history. One rhythmic, iron-studded step at a time. The road stretches ahead, and as you march, your mind drifts to the caliga's role in battle itself. Beyond walking long distances or signaling unity, these sandals were tactical instruments, influencing movement, agility, and even survival on the battlefield. Every step is deliberate, every hobnail strategically placed, turning the foot into a small weapon of traction and endurance. Picture a skirmish on uneven terrain. Mud, gravel, and loose stones litter the ground. You adjust your footing, relying on the caliga to grip the soil, pivot without slipping, and absorb shocks as you maneuver around comrades. Iron studs bite the earth, giving leverage for sudden turns or lunges, while thick leather soles protect against jagged rocks and enemy debris. A quirky tidbit: some soldiers hammered tiny grooves into soles for extra grip during sieges or river crossings. Improvised cleats, centuries before climbing gear existed. Historians still argue whether caliga offered significant combat advantage or if they were mainly utilitarian. Yet evidence suggests soldiers performed better on rough terrain with hobnailed soles, and the open design minimized blistering during prolonged engagements. Footwear wasn't just about comfort, it was an extension of military strategy. You feel this with every pivot, step, and clack, as if the shoe itself is part of the Army's intelligence. And then there's the psychological aspect. A legion advancing in perfect cadence, hobnails striking stone in synchrony, is intimidating beyond the immediate threat of weapons. The sound projects order, power, and inevitability. Enemy scouts hearing the rhythmic march might overestimate numbers, hesitate, or falter. Sandals become instruments of perception, influencing how battles unfold even before swords clash. The adaptability of caliga shines here too. Soldiers could modify them for different terrains, adding leather inserts, tightening or loosening straps, or even lacing them differently to suit speed or endurance. Each step is a negotiation between standardization and personal adjustment, a constant optimization for performance under pressure. You notice the subtle intelligence required to maintain balance, maneuver effectively, and coordinate with fellow soldiers. Even injuries are mitigated by design. The layered leather protects against minor cuts and bruises. Hobnails give traction to prevent slips and sprains. Straps keep the foot secure without excessive constriction. Footwear, in essence, is part of the soldier's defensive armor, integrated into movement, coordination, and survival. By mid-battle, the sandal's influence is clear. Soldiers move as a cohesive unit, pivoting, advancing, and retreating with fluidity. Every hobnail strike communicates rhythm. Every strap and layer contributes to agility and endurance. The caliga is no longer just a shoe. It is an instrument of war, silent yet decisive, shaping both the physical and psychological dynamics of combat. And as you step through imagination, clattering along a battlefield, you feel the subtle genius of Roman engineering. A simple sandal transformed into a tactical tool, endurance device, and psychological amplifier. Every worn leather strap, every iron-studded sole carries centuries of thought, adaptation, and strategy underfoot. You realize Rome didn't just march armies, it walked them into history. The day wanes, your feet heavy but persistent, and you start to notice how caligae connect the mundane to the monumental. Each worn sole, scuffed leather, and clanking hobnail is a small thread in the vast tapestry of Rome's history, stretching from provincial camps to imperial conquests. You feel it under your own aching feet, the cumulative labor of centuries of soldiers, cobblers, blacksmiths, and logisticians, all converging in these unassuming sandals. Imagine the last leg of a forced march. Dust rises around your ankles, wind tugging at your cloak, sun dipping low. You glance at fellow soldiers and see the same worn straps, patched soles, and dusty surfaces. Each step resonates in rhythm with hundreds of others, a living echo of discipline and shared experience. Quirky tidbit. Some legionaries are said to have personalized hobnail patterns, secretly leaving marks to identify themselves in camp or to amuse themselves during long, monotonous marches. You can almost see faint geometric designs pressed into soles, like hidden messages for the patient eye. Historians still argue whether such individual touches were widespread or exceptions born of boredom and creativity. Regardless, the fact that soldiers even attempted personalization hints at a subtle human desire for expression, even within the rigid confines of military life. The caliga becomes more than utility. It's identity, pride, and a tiny rebellion against uniformity, all in leather and iron. Consider the symbolic power of these sandals. Marching across conquered territories, hobnails striking stone and dirt, the sound signals dominance and order. Dust-covered roads bear invisible imprints of empire, each step reinforcing Rome's authority. Even today, archaeologists can trace ancient roads and sites through impressions left by these iron-studded soles. Small yet persistent traces of human movement that endured for millennia. The caliga is also a testament to human ingenuity under constraint. Soldiers optimized, repaired, modified, and maintained them, blending practical knowledge with tactile intelligence. They endure extreme conditions, traverse diverse terrains, and amplify both morale and efficiency. Footwear becomes strategy, endurance, and culture, fused into a singular object. As you trudge along this imagined landscape, you reflect on the paradox of the caliga. It is simultaneously humble and extraordinary. Humble because it is a sandal, simple in materials, worn and patched. Extraordinary because it enables an army to conquer continents, maintain cohesion, and leave lasting impressions, both literal and figurative, across history. And as the sun finally dips below the horizon, you realize the truth. Each step, each clack of iron, each scrape of leather carries more than a soldier. It carries an empire, a culture, and centuries of human experience. The caliga, small and unassuming, quietly shaped the world underfoot. Now slow your pace and let the world of Roman soldiers fade gently into the background. Imagine the dust settling around their campfires, the clatter of hobnails quieting as night embraces the empire. The wind cools your skin, and the rhythmic march softens into a distant echo. Your feet, tired and sore, are free to rest. Your imagination can linger on the warmth of leather, the faint scent of tanned hide, and the subtle metallic tang of iron nails. Breathe in slowly. Picture the ancient world calming itself as darkness spreads across hills, rivers, and roads. The soldiers' voices are hushed, tools are laid aside, and the workshops dim. Each strap, each sole, each tiny hammer strike rests in stillness. Even the grand sweep of history pauses, allowing you to linger in the quiet moment between march and rest, between exertion and peace. Let the cadence of clacking hobnails dissolve into a soft memory, like a lullaby for the feet and the mind. Feel the connection across time, you, here and now, tracing the steps of countless soldiers who once bore the weight of an empire underfoot. Sense the endurance, the ingenuity, and the subtle triumph hidden in simple sandals. As your body relaxes, let go of imagined aches, and let your mind drift with the soft cadence of history's footsteps fading into night. There is comfort in knowing that even the smallest things, a strip of leather, a few iron nails, can carry weight far beyond themselves. Let your thoughts float among these echoes, calm and gentle, until sleep takes over and carries you through the quiet remnants of a world long past. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and drift peacefully alongside the roads of Rome. Every step a whispered story of endurance and resilience.